Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Bryce Ellison, and I'm 31 years old. I work as a commercial real estate appraiser in New York, which means I spend most of my days measuring value, spotting flaws, and listening to people exaggerate what they own. It is not glamorous work, but it pays well, and it taught me early that square footage and pride are two very different things. That matters here. 3 months ago, my girlfriend posted a photo carousel of my loft and wrote, "When your boyfriend's apartment is so small, you can barely breathe. Manhattan living is not the flex people think it is. Somebody give me a house in Connecticut." There was a weary face emoji at the end, like she had been sentenced to hardship. My apartment was a 1,000 square foot loft in lower Manhattan with 12-foot ceilings, exposed brick, original hardwood floors, oversized warehouse windows, a full bath and half bath, and enough open living space that people usually went quiet for a second the first time they stepped inside. I commented, "Feel free to find more space elsewhere." Then I changed the locks, packed her things carefully, and put them in a climate-controlled storage unit. What she found elsewhere was a studio in Queens she could actually afford. That sounds colder on paper than it felt in real life. I did not wake up one morning looking for a reason to throw somebody out. I loved her. That is the part people always skip when they tell this story back to me, like it is some clean little morality tale. They make it sound like I was just waiting for her to slip, so I could deliver a clever line and protect my property. The truth is worse and softer than that. I cared about Vanessa enough that I let myself mistake gratitude for depth. I mistook comfort for partnership. I mistook the way she settled into my home for the way she might have settled into my life. By the time everything cracked, it was not the apartment she had insulted. It was the care behind it. It was the trust that let her hang her clothes in my closet, leave her skincare in my bathroom, laugh with her friends on my sofa, and call my home ours without me correcting her. That is why the post ended it. Not because it was mean, not because it was public, and it absolutely was. It ended us because it revealed that while I had been building something sincere, she had been curating dissatisfaction. I bought the loft when I was 24. That sentence sounds more impressive than the reality that came with it. My grandfather left me money when he died, enough for a meaningful down payment, but not enough to float me afterward. I bought during a window when rates were favorable. The building was less fashionable than it became later, and I was willing to live tighter than most people my age would tolerate. For 3 years, I said no to vacations, wore suits until they looked tired at the elbows, and learned exactly how many meals could be made out of rice, beans, eggs, and stubbornness. I do not say that for sympathy. I say it because there is a difference between getting help and having everything handed to you, and I knew that difference every month when a mortgage drafted. The place became more than an asset to me. It was proof that timing had opened the door. Yes, but discipline had kept me inside. I refinished the floors one room at a time. I had built tents installed after saving for them. I spent weekends hanging shelves, sealing brick, comparing light fixtures, and learning which little improvements made the big raw space feel warm instead of echoing. It became the first thing in my adult life that felt fully mine. I met Vanessa at a birthday dinner for a mutual friend in Brooklyn. She was funny in a way that made the whole table lean toward her. Not loud, not crude, just sharp. She could take an ordinary observation and turn it half a degree until everyone laughed because she had named something true. She worked at a dental office in Midtown, and she carried herself with the polished efficiency of someone who spent her days keeping other people's schedules from collapsing. She was beautiful, obviously, but what got me first was how easy she made conversation feel. On our third date, she told me I had serious man with hidden sarcasm, energy. On our fifth, she brought a bottle of wine to my place and reorganized my terrible spice shelf while I cooked. The first night she stayed over, she stood in the middle of the living room in my t-shirt, turned a slow circle, and said, "This place does not even feel real." She said it with wonder then. I remember that clearly, because later I kept going back to it like a man checking old photos for signs of weather damage. I wanted to know when amazement became resentment, and I still cannot say exactly when the line moved. She moved in about a year into our relationship, not with a dramatic U-Haul and speeches about forever. It happened the way a lot of modern cohabitation happens. More weekends turned into most nights. Most nights turned into nearly every night. Her shoes were by the door, her toothbrush lived in the bathroom, and eventually we looked at each other and admitted she was barely using her own place anymore. Her income was modest compared to mine. She cleared around $2,800 a month after taxes. I never asked her to pay toward my mortgage. We split groceries, and she handled the electric bill most months, which made her share of living in a Manhattan loft laughably low compared to the market around us. I did that because I could, and because I believe generosity should feel like ease, not leverage. I bought a freestanding wardrobe for her clothes so she would not feel cramped. I cleared out my home office closet for her seasonal stuff. I had an extra key made for her, then later gave her the code to the building app and garage access because I wanted her to move through my life without feeling like a visitor waiting to be let in. That part was real. I did not pretend with her. The months before the betrayal were not all fake either, which made it hurt more. There were nights she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder while a movie played 3 scenes past where we both stopped paying attention. She liked old soul records on Sunday mornings and expensive candles she pretended not to care about, but always noticed when they burned out. She laughed hardest when she was trying not to. She left notes on my coffee mug when I had early appraisal hearings downtown. Once, when I came home after a brutal week of inspections and winter rain, she had cooked pasta, folded the blanket at my end of the couch, and queued up the game because she remembered I had recorded it. That is the kind of memory that complicates a clean ending. People think betrayal stories are made stronger if the betrayer was awful from the start. They are not. They are stronger when the good parts were convincing enough that you opened the door all the way. I did that. I introduced her to my mother on FaceTime. I brought her to a firm holiday party. I handed her a drawer, then a key, then unspoken trust. So when she made me into a joke, I did not feel insulted first. I felt exposed. The complaints started gradually around month 5 of her living there. At first they sounded like normal domestic nitpicking. She wanted a bigger closet. We had a custom built-in and the wardrobe I had bought specifically for her things, but I figured everybody wants more storage. She said the kitchen felt cramped on the days we both cooked at once. That was not entirely crazy. Loft kitchens are open, but they are still kitchens. She said she wished there were 2 full bathrooms instead of 1.5. I laughed and told her most people in Manhattan would sell a cousin for even the half bath. She laughed too. I thought it was banter. Then the tone shifted. The comments started showing up when her friends were over. Vanessa would pour wine, gesture around the room, and say things like, "Sorry, we're making it work in here," or "Ignore the lack of space, we do what we can." Her friends would glance around with polite confusion because the living area fit an L-shaped sectional, a coffee table, a bookshelf wall, 2 accent chairs, and a reading corner by the windows. One evening, after the others went to the bathroom, her friend Danica quietly said to me, "Your place is beautiful. I don't know why she keeps pretending it's tiny." I laughed it off. Inside, something tightened. I tried to deal with it like an adult before I ever got angry. One night after her friends left, I said, "Hey, when you make those jokes about this place being small, are you actually unhappy here?" She was taking off her earrings at the bathroom mirror. She looked at me through the glass and said, "Bryce, relax. It's just a running joke." I asked why the joke was always at my apartment's expense. She said I was being dramatic. I let it go because I was still operating under the assumption that there was some private tenderness under her public carelessness. I told myself maybe she was trying to impress her friends. Maybe she liked exaggeration. Maybe she did not understand how it landed because she had never built a space from the ground up the way I had. Once, I even suggested we reorganize the bedroom if she genuinely needed it to feel more functional. She said, "No, it's fine," then posted a story the next week about city people pretending closets are optional. That was when I started noticing how often the joke only worked when there was an audience. It was less about space than performance. She wanted to be seen as someone too elevated for her circumstances, even when her circumstances were more generous than most people's best-case scenario. The actual post went up on a Saturday, while I was at a work conference in Midtown. I had been gone all day listening to panelists talk about mixed-use valuations and retail compression, the kind of event that leave you tired in a suit without having done anything physically difficult. I came home a little after 8, loosened my tie, heated leftovers, and sat down on the couch with my phone. Vanessa was in the bedroom. I saw her post because one of my coworkers, who followed her, had already sent it to me with, "Man, this your place?" That was the first hit. Not strangers. Not her followers. Somebody from my actual life, seeing her distort my home for entertainment. The carousel showed the loft from the worst possible angles. She had crouched low and shot toward walls to flatten the space. In one kitchen picture, the island was piled with packages, mail, and a blender we normally kept away. In another, she had dragged the coat rack partly in front of the living room windows so the depth disappeared. The caption read, "When your boyfriend's apartment is so small you can barely breathe. Manhattan living is not the flex people think it is. Somebody get me a house with a garden." There was a weary face emoji and a laughing one. The comments were full of pity, mockery, and people telling her she deserved better. I stood in the bedroom doorway with my phone still open. She was scrolling, smiling at something on her screen. I said, "Hey, I saw your post." She did not even look embarrassed. She glanced up and said, "Which one?" That answer told me more than the post itself. There had been no moment of conscience, no awareness that maybe she had crossed a line. I said, "The one where you tell the internet my apartment is too small for you." She shrugged and said, "Oh my God, Bryce. It's a joke." I walked farther into the room and turned the phone toward her. "It doesn't read like a joke. It reads like you're embarrassed by where you live." She sat up against the headboard and gave me the expression she used when she thought I was missing something obvious. People exaggerate on social media. That's the whole point. I asked why the photos were staged. I pointed at the clutter on the island, the blocked windows, the way she had chosen the one angle in the bedroom that made it look narrow. She laughed once, short and dry, and said, "Sorry my aesthetic offended your blueprint brain." That was the moment. Not the caption, not the comments. The laugh. The way she made my hurt sound nerdy and inconvenient. I remember exactly how calm I got after that. People talk about seeing red when they are angry. I had the opposite experience. Everything cooled. I said, "Take it down." She crossed her arms and said, "No." I asked if she was serious. She said I needed thicker skin. I said, "Vanessa, people from my job have already seen it." That did not move her. If anything, she seemed irritated that I had brought real-world consequences into something she wanted to keep framed as harmless. She said, "Then maybe your coworkers need lives." I asked her one last time to take it down. She said, "Bryce, it was a post. You're acting like I cheated on you." There are sentences that end relationships before the speaker hears themselves say them. That was one. Not because social media is equal to infidelity, but because the comparison told me everything she thought counted and everything she thought did not. Publicly humiliating me in my own home did not matter to her, because she did not respect the thing she had humiliated. She thought the cost of me was imaginary. I stared at her for a second and said, "Feel free to find more space elsewhere." She laughed. Sure, she had won some private little contest. When she realized I was not joking, the laugh died. I slept on the couch that night because I did not want to share air with someone who had just made contempt look casual. The next morning, I handled it the same way I handled difficult work, in steps. First, I screenshotted the post, the comments, and the timestamp. Then I texted Wesley, an old law school friend from college who now practiced in New York, and asked whether I needed to be careful about anything if I ended a live-in relationship where the other person was not on title, did not receive mail, there, and had never paid rent. He told me what any smart lawyer tells you in a situation like that. Facts matter. Do not freelance legal confidence. Document everything, and give her a reasonable, orderly way to retrieve her belongings. He did not make it sound magical or foolproof. He made it sound manageable if I stayed clean and calm. That was enough for me. I called a locksmith and told Vanessa by text while she was out at brunch, "We need to end this. I'm arranging for your things to be packed and stored safely. I'll send details." I did not do it as a surprise ambush. I did it as a separation. The locksmith replaced both deadbolts. I paid more than I would have liked, but there are moments when money is just a receipt for peace. After that, I started packing. I packed her things more carefully than she deserved, and more carefully than I would have believed possible if you had asked me the night before. I wrapped the record player in bubble wrap. I folded her dresses instead of stuffing them. I separated the skincare bottles so nothing leaked. I boxed the West Elm pillows she had once insisted were investment pillows, and I even tucked the little ceramic ring dish from my nightstand into a padded envelope because it had been her grandmother's. My building service elevator made the move easier than it sounds, and the storage facility was close enough that 2 trips with a borrowed hand truck and 1 hired car did the job. I rented a climate-controlled unit under my name, paid the first month, and kept the receipt. Then I sat at the kitchen island she had staged for the internet, drafted a text, deleted it, drafted it again, and made sure it sounded factual instead of theatrical. At 2:47 that afternoon I sent, I packed your belongings and placed them in a climate-controlled storage unit nearby. The first month is paid. The unit number, hours, and access code are below. Given everything, I think this is the cleanest way to separate. I wish you well. It was not warm. It was not cruel. It was the most mercy I had left. Her response came 11 minutes later, and it arrived exactly the way people's entitlement usually arrives once convenience is removed. Not as sadness first, but outrage. She texted, "Are you out of your mind? Then, you pack my stuff? Then, you change the locks? I live here." I replied once and kept it brief. "You stayed here. Your belongings are safe and accessible. I'm not debating this by text." She called immediately. I declined. She called again. Then she said she was calling the police because what I had done was illegal. I told her she was free to do that. 2 officers came that evening. I showed them proof that I owned the unit, my management records, the storage receipt, and the text with the access code. They asked practical questions, which I answered without trying to perform righteousness. One of them looked at me like he personally would have handled it differently. That was fine. Personal opinion is not a legal category. They told me it looked like a domestic property dispute without a criminal angle, and advised me to keep records. When they left, I sat in the suddenly quiet living room and realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from grief that had not had time to fully arrive yet. It is a strange thing to end a relationship by inventory. Monday morning, she came to the building with her mother. The doorman called upstairs and asked whether I wanted to authorize visitors. I said no. About 10 minutes later, he called again, trying not to laugh, and said, "You have a very determined delegation down here." Later, he told me the broad version of what happened. Her mother demanded access, invoked lawyers, and treated the lobby like a courthouse. I believed all of it because by then I had already learned how the family handled shame. They did not process it privately. They widened it, recruited it, turned it into a community project. That same evening, her mother posted a long Facebook paragraph about how her daughter had given everything to an ungrateful man who discarded her over a silly post. Silly. That word kept showing up. Silly post. Joke. Running gag. Every minimizing phrase seemed designed to erase the actual offense, which was not the internet itself, but the pleasure Vanessa took in reducing me to a punchline. The next day, her brother texted me from an unknown number telling me to stop playing games and let his sister come back properly. I told him her property was available for pickup. He said, "You know what I mean." I didn't know what he meant. He meant restore the comfort she had lost. He meant give the loft back without asking why she deserved it. Midweek, Vanessa changed tactics and tried to sound official. She sent a text saying she was formally requesting re-entry to the residence where she had been staying and that she might have rights under New York law. It was obvious someone had coached the wording. I forwarded it to Wesley, who told me not to engage the argument directly and to keep responses limited, factual, and boring. So I did. "Please coordinate retrieval of your belongings through the storage facility. I won't discuss the residence further." Around the same time, Danica, the friend who had once told me my place was incredible, sent me screenshots Vanessa had posted months earlier joking that she loved living with me because she didn't have to deal with lease nonsense anymore. Danica added, "I'm sending this because she's out of control, not because I want to be in the middle." That felt believable to me. She was not eager, just tired, and I appreciated the difference. The picture that was becoming clear was ugly in a way bigger than one post. Vanessa had enjoyed the freedom of being untethered to responsibility while still wanting the social credit of acting above the arrangement. She wanted the benefits of my stability without the humility of admitting it benefited her. That was the real split between us. Not square footage. Reality. She kept escalating in petty directions after that. She called building management and implied I was subletting rooms illegally. The property manager phoned me, embarrassed on both our behalf, and asked whether there was anything he should know. I explained that it was retaliatory fallout from a breakup and offered documents if needed. He declined and said he would note the complaint and move on. It was only a 20-minute interruption to my day, but I remember sitting at my desk after that call and feeling something heavier than anger settle in. Reputation damage is exhausting because it asks you to keep proving ordinary truth to people who never needed the drama in the first place. That same afternoon, I got a message from a junior analyst at my firm saying, "Hey, hope things are okay," in a tone people use when they have seen something embarrassing but do not know whether to admit it. So now the post was not just hers and her followers. It was crossing over into my actual world. That mattered. I had never once posted about our relationship in a way that exposed her. I had not complained about our finances to my friends. I had not turned our domestic life into content. She had done the opposite, and then called me sensitive for bleeding when it landed. The storage unit argument started on Friday. She texted to say the unit was too far from her parents' house on Long Island, and that I needed to move her things closer or deliver them myself. I read the message twice because I wanted to be sure I was not inventing the audacity through irritation. The facility was convenient to the apartment where she had been living, close to transit, clean, and paid through the first month. Its inconvenience relative to her new dependence on her parents was not my responsibility. I told her the location was final, and the paid period ended on the 14th. She said she did not have a car. I told her there were moving vans, ride shares, and brothers who text strangers demanding access on behalf of grown women. She did not appreciate that. A friend of hers later sent me a direct message saying Vanessa had spent money making your apartment feel like home, and the least I could do was help her get on her feet. I looked around my kitchen and thought about the 4 pillows, the candle subscription, the towels, the framed print she made me help hang crooked because she refused a level. Then I thought about 8 months of housing, groceries, dinners out, and the 1,000 small costs I never itemized because that is not how you behave with someone you love. She had converted generosity into entitlement so completely that even the exit needed to subsidize her. About 2 weeks later, reality introduced itself to Vanessa more harshly than I ever had. Through Danica, and through the ordinary gossip that leaks when a dramatic person starts apartment hunting in public, I learned she had assumed she would quickly upgrade. That part almost made me laugh. She had spent so long treating my loft like a burden that she seemed genuinely convinced a better situation would be easy to find once freed from my small apartment. But New York does not care about your aesthetic. It cares about income, guarantors, credit, deposits, and whether you can prove on paper that your desires deserve square footage. Vanessa could not. Places she liked were out of reach. Places she could technically reach came with roommates, long commutes, or conditions she found humiliating after living with me. She finally landed a studio in Queens for $1,650 a month, around 340 square feet. No dishwasher, no laundry in unit, one narrow window facing brick. Her mother had a co-sign. When I first heard that, I did not feel triumphant. I felt something much sadder and sharper. She had traded real comfort for curated dissatisfaction. And now she was learning the exact market price of contempt. All because she wanted strangers to agree she deserved better than what she was freely being given. The part that made the consequences feel fully self-inflicted was not the Queen's studio itself. It was what came after she moved in. Danica told me Vanessa had stood in the middle of the place and said, "I can see the whole apartment without turning my head." That sounded plausible enough that I believed it. More telling was what else followed. Vanessa apparently tried to recreate the lifestyle she had in my loft inside a space that could not physically hold it. She brought over decorative baskets, a standing mirror, too many shoes, the record player, and the pillows. The room swallowed none of it kindly. She had to stack things vertically, shove boxes under the bed, and choose between keeping kitchen appliances on the counter or having enough room to actually cook. Then she discovered the laundromat situation, the noise through the walls, the fact that her neighbors argued at midnight, and the very practical humiliation of paying more than half her monthly income for an apartment she had once mocked other people for accepting. There was no villain there except her own arrogance. I had not set those rent numbers. I had not created the market. I had simply stopped shielding her from it. That distinction mattered to me. I was not punishing her. I was refusing to keep rescuing someone who had publicly disrespected the rescue. Her mother called me about a week after the Queen's lease was signed. I picked up because I thought it might be work. She did not bother with hello. She said, "My daughter is living in a box because of you." I told her we should not be communicating. She pushed past that and asked whether I was proud of myself. The answer that came to mind was not suitable for polite company, so I gave her the calmer truth instead. I said, She's living in an apartment she can afford. Her mother accused me of dangling nice things in front of a woman and snatching them away the moment she stopped praising me for them. That line stayed with me because it accidentally revealed the whole family philosophy. They thought support became permanent the second it was enjoyed. They thought access, once granted, matured into obligation. I told her Vanessa had publicly humiliated my home, refused to remove the post, and dismissed the professional and personal damage when I told her it mattered. Her mother called it a joke. Then she demanded I pay Vanessa's security deposit on the new place because I had forced the move. I actually laughed at that once into the phone, not because it was funny, because sometimes absurdity hits the body before language does. I told her no, clearly and permanently, and blocked the number after she called back 3 more times that week. Then the storage problem came back around. I had set up the first month under my information because I needed a fast solution that same day, but when the paid month ended, I got notice that the remaining balance was going unpaid. Vanessa had collected only part of her things. She did not have room for the rest in the studio, which was the kind of practical fact that would have made an excellent caption if she still felt like joking about cramped living. I called the facility, removed my payment method, and followed their process to designate her as the responsible contact for the unit going forward. Then I sent one last text. The storage account is now under your contact information. My card has been removed. Please handle the remaining balance and any items you wish to keep. She replied almost immediately, I can't afford that. You put my stuff there. You should pay for it. I looked at the screen for a while and realized there was nothing left to say that was not repetition. Her position never changed. Every consequence was my fault. Every limit was cruelty. Every act of self-protection was somehow abuse. I changed my number the next morning. Not dramatically. Not with a flourish. Just another quiet administrative step in closing a door I should have closed the first time contempt showed its face. A few weeks later, I got the legal letter. It came through my building management office, because Vanessa apparently still could not resist routing inconvenience through every available channel. The letter demanded compensation for wrongful eviction, moving costs, storage fees, deposit losses, and emotional distress. The total was $8,200. I stared at it at my dining table and felt, above all else, tired. Not scared. Not enraged. Tired. I hired an actual real estate attorney through my firm's referral network and paid for proper counsel because by then I wanted no part of amateur cleanup. She reviewed the documentation, the texts, the screenshots, the ownership records, the storage receipts, the management notes, and the social media evidence. Her written response was restrained and devastating. It stated, in polished legal terms, that Vanessa had not been an owner, tenant, or rent-paying occupant, that her belongings had been safeguarded and made accessible, that no legal basis for damages existed on the facts presented, and that any further harassment or defamatory public statements would be addressed accordingly. We never heard back. Not from that lawyer, not from another, not from anyone with actual standing. That silence felt better than any speech could have. Silence, in some situations, is the sound a weak case makes after meeting structure. The social media part lingered longer than the legal part. That was the piece I underestimated. The original post stayed up for weeks, and because I refused to start an online war, it kept quietly shaping me in rooms I entered later. People who knew her vaguely looked at me differently. One guy I'd met at a rooftop party months before sent me, "You should be ashamed." A coworker asked at lunch whether everything was okay at home in a tone so careful it made my stomach turn. That is the thing about distortion. Even when the facts are flimsy, the image sticks because it is easier to absorb a story than investigate it. I had been reduced to a type. The controlling boyfriend with the inadequate apartment and the fragile ego. None of it was true, but truth is not automatically the first version people encounter. Eventually, Danica asked if there was anything that showed the actual scale of the place, because she was exhausted watching Vanessa weaponize fiction. I sent her one wide-angle photo of the living room. No caption. No explanation. Just the room as it was. Sectional, reading chair, built-ins, exposed brick, light pouring in, depth impossible to fake away. Danica posted it on her own story with 5 words. For context, this is it. That was all it took. No manifesto. No public defense brief. Just a normal photo that made Vanessa's post look ridiculous by comparison. People started connecting the furniture, the angles, the layout. Comments appeared on her original post, asking whether she had been serious. Someone mentioned the apartment looked enormous. Someone else said, "Wait, this is the same place." That kind of public unraveling is especially brutal because it requires no coordinated attack. It only requires the truth to show up wearing decent lighting. Vanessa deleted the post by the end of the day. She did not apologize publicly, which I expected. What I did not expect was the private apology attempt that came a week later through email, because that was the only route left open to her. It was not a good apology. It said she had been in a weird headspace, that social media had made her exaggerate, that she never thought it would go this far, and that maybe we had both been stubborn. There was again that instinct to redistribute blame until the insult looked mutual. I wrote one sentence back. It went exactly as far as your choices pushed it. Then I archived the thread. That felt cleaner than rage, cleaner than closure speeches. Sometimes the most accurate response to revisionist history is a closed file. The final consequence arrived months later in the form of a small, almost petty-seeming detail that somehow made the whole thing land harder than the lawyer letter ever had. I ran into Danica outside a coffee shop in Soho. We talked for 10 minutes, mostly about work and mutual friends, and before she left she said Vanessa had broken her lease renewal budget trying to make the Queen studio feel less temporary. She had bought shelving, a rolling cart, curtains, organizers, little cosmetic fixes meant to disguise the fact that she hated the place. Then the rent increase notice came, modest by city standards but enough to punch through the illusion. Danica said Vanessa had sat at her own tiny table and cried because she finally understood that what she had lost was not just a man or an apartment. It was margin, ease, quiet, security, the ability to be careless because someone steadier was carrying the heavier half of life. That hit me more than I expected. Not because I wanted her back. I did not. And not because I enjoyed her pain. I did not. It hit me because that was the first consequence that sounded like understanding. Not inconvenience. Not embarrassment. Understanding. She had mistaken generosity for something owed, and by the time she understood its value, she was pricing storage units, square footage, and peace the hard way. I still live in a loft. The couch still has the faint indent where she used to sit with a blanket over her legs and that record player humming by the windows. For a while the place felt unnaturally quiet, not because it was too large, but because betrayal leaves an odd acoustic behind. It changes the sound of a room. I replaced the locks, changed my number, kept the kitchen towels, and threw out nothing useful out of spite. I went to work. I pay my mortgage. I cook for one. Little by little, the apartment stopped feeling like the scene of something and went back to being home. The lesson was not that women are ungrateful or that generosity is foolish. The lesson was narrower and more useful than that. When someone turns your care into content, believe the performance. When someone enjoys humiliating what shelters them, believe the contempt. When someone confuses access with entitlement, do not argue them into humility. Just remove the access. Vanessa wanted more space. What she really wanted was the appearance of deserving more without the burden of earning or appreciating it. She traded substance for image and ended up paying full market price for both the lie and the lesson. I gave her exactly what she asked for. Somewhere else. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.